part of a generation of tools. It's really built to make cybersecurity easier. Hey Shane, I'm just realizing your biopic doesn't have the mustache.
Mustache is new. This was originally a Halloween costume, and it is kept on for November for a little bit. So we'll see if I go back to the clean look.
I
But
don't know. We've met a bunch of times, and I was just thinking, oh, mustache, that looks good.
yeah, well, I
So
very much appreciate it. It is I can't grow the beard like you can, so this is the one thing I got a shot at.
it's a little patchy actually, but it's from a front-facing camera, it's
Yeah.
right on, right on.
Well, looking spot on. I don't get anything on the cheeks, so it gets very Amish underneath. But I'll stick with the mustache for the time being.
All right. So you're down in Florida having an exceptionally crazy storm season. I'm up in New York having fire season, which I didn't apparently is a New York thing now. We were just talking about that. Shane used to be from New York. So he was scratching his head even more than me. Like, what happened in New York since when was the last time you lived up here?
It was 13 years ago at this point. It's been
Yeah.
a while, so
Now we have fire season.
which is a whole different thing. At least we were prepared for hurricanes. We're used to those. Fire season in New York's a whole different wheelhouse.
Yeah. Well, the fire departments are like really not on top of the game. Uh, it's really different putting out a house fire
Yep.
than putting out a whole forest. But
That's always the funny thing too. Down here, it's like whenever we get snow, people have no idea what's going on. It's a completely outside of the usual realm.
so you were just at IT Nation. We're sliding on into those holiday territories. What's the thing you're looking forward to next week? Are you traveling for Turkey Day?
I am indeed. I'm actually headed up to Pensacola, Florida this weekend to go be with the family for that week. So be nice. Couple days of relaxation. Way too much food as usual, and getting to see the fam, which would be great. What about you? You got anything good planned?
The whole week too. I was just off the phone with someone else, and they were saying, yeah, the kids are home for the whole week, and I'm like, the whole week, and I take like a day and a half off,
Yep.
and I feel like
Yeah.
that feels like a big deal.
Yeah. We're
And then
getting. We got the tail end. I'll probably do a little work on Wednesday. Got the tail end of Wednesday and then Friday off. So I will be working. It's just it will be nice to actually have a little time to kick back, especially on Thursday.
so what's your dish? Do you do a dish?
Ooh, I don't do the dish, but my mom does every dish, and they are all phenomenal. I help out occasionally. I'm much more of the get everything into the house, get everything out of the house, make sure everything is set up. But I let the
You
specialists
let
go.
the experts, yeah, do their thing.
Exactly.
All right. Well, let me ask that a different way. Which is the
My
dish
favorite.
that is like you're gonna eat the most of?
I have to go with the brown sugar sweet potatoes with a little bit of the walnuts on top. That is always my go-to. Bunch of
Yeah,
stacks on that. Then never can go wrong with a little extra stuffing.
yeah. I'm hungry. I'm hungry
Yeah,
now.
exactly. Now I'm gonna need to eat after this. So, what are your go-tos? What are your go-tos on that side?
Uh, so as I'm getting, I'm not an old dude, but I'm at the point in my life where I have to think really hard about like every meal, which
Yep.
is that's where I am in life. We all
Here
should be there, really.
Yep.
But so I used to really love the sugared yams and the stuffing, and these days, so I'm audiences probably don't know. I'm lacto vegetarian. That means I don't eat turkey or ham. But I'll make like mock meat out of like wheat gluten, and like there's a whole like it's almost like baking a cake,
Yeah.
but it turns into like fake meat. Uh, yeah, I'm just that weird vegetarian guy. But chicken's what our household does for the meat dish. Because like turkeys are a pain in the butt. Like They take forever. Like if you make one wrong move, it's like an extra 3 hours. Like
Yeah.
I so
We've done that before too. Of we went to do it was a friendsgiving. We went to go do a turkey. The turkey did not fit in the very small apartment oven that we had at the time. So instead, we were like, "All right, guess we're not doing turkey. We'll do two smaller chickens," and that sufficed and was also delicious. So fine by me.
yeah. I think I sort of live for the pies though. I
It's a
like
whole nother ball game.
pecan pie, squash pie. Like those are pretty great for me.
Standard pumpkin's always a good one for me as well. Throw a little whipped cream on there. I know the lactose part of it, but that is definitely something to look forward to. And usually there ends up being an assortment of cookies, which I'm never going to turn down either. So,
Oh yeah, I forgot about it. We're in cookie season too.
oh
All
yeah,
right.
that's really
If we were having a food podcast, it would be time to show how we make all of these things. But today we're gonna have a short lecture on security stakeholder roles, and then we're gonna get into topic of the day. We'll talk more about Finn and Shane's journey a little later. So with that, I'm gonna jump right in. So, security stakeholder roles. I think that I first of all, I love giving this talk to people that are technologists because they look at it and they're like, "Really? It's not my responsibility. Like, there's other people that that are more responsible than me." But just to talk about, and this is like if you open a security theory book, right? That or a legal book or any place where people are really being held accountable for cybersecurity challenges. The number one most accountable person in an organization is not anyone in IT; it's the board of directors and the chief executive. So it's operationally due diligence, the chief executive, but if there's a board of directors, and there usually is some type of trustee or board in charge, they also have a due care obligation, and any of them could be held liable for not caring or not doing enough about cybersecurity. And that's like really where the buck stops. You know, you really can't pin it on IT when there's a security failure because the CEO should know better. Um, they should have read the risk assessment. And if they didn't do a risk assessment, that's their fault. That's not IT's fault, right? And the risk assessment should have told them, X, Y, or Z. And if the risk assessment didn't say that, it's still the chief executive's problem that maybe they hired the wrong assessor, right? So, um, board of directors, chief executive. Under that, we're still not IT. We're talking about management and asset owners. So, between the chief executive, you have people that are responsible for areas of a business, department heads, people that are in charge of a process like payroll. Those people, again, more responsible for cybersecurity than the technologists that are, in technical terms, we actually use the word custodians, are usually, in charge of making sure things are configured securely. And I think that this really aligns with what you see in security awareness training and education world in general, which is security is everyone's job, right? What you don't often hear is it's actually more the user's job, more the CEO's job, more the board's job than it is the people in technology. And down at the bottom, we've got users and security analysts, and at the very very bottom, we have the technologists whose job it is to help the security analysts and users stay secure, but it's not their job to do security for them, right? So it's the user's responsibility to take care of security. It's the technologist's job or the IT guy's job to support the users in being secure. So this security hierarchy is pretty standardized in the risk management world. I added a little note here. If you're an IT MSP, your responsibilities are down there at the bottom. You're either in some combination of the security analyst or technologist category. Um, so that's the role hierarchy. But there's some other examples here I want to bring up. I was talking about uh, the management organization. And in the management organization, you have this is in security terminology, okay? There's a business owner, right? That's the person with the ultimate responsibility for cyber risk. It's usually a CEO, although sometimes there's a complicated organizational structure. It's not always the CEO. As an example, if you have a conglomerate, you might have a like a business line manager and an overall CEO, but it really might be that unit manager that's responsible for all the risk in that line of business. Then you have the asset owners. These are the people that buy things or the people that use things. So the two examples I have here, the director of sales owns Salesforce, right? They decided to spend $1 million on Salesforce or $100,000 on Salesforce or whatever it is for their organization. They're responsible for security in it and with the risk in it. The COO, oftentimes, if there's a COO and if there's an ERP, the COO owns the ERP. Sometimes there'll be a separate like uh, systems owner, but that's asset ownership. And then you have custodians, and these are the IT people. And in the IT MSP world, it's your fully managed service provider that does the deployment. They operate the asset, they maintain it, make sure it's secure, right? So those are the custodians, and both of those people, the owners and the custodians, are responsible for security. There's some other roles I just want to touch on quickly. Data stewards. We don't talk enough about this in our industry because, frankly, the whole world's not doing a great job of data inventory, data controls. They're usually focused on assets, but there's a job called a data steward. Um, the idea there is that while an overall system may have an owner and a custodian may be in charge of caring for like a device, that there's like a named person who's in charge of the data that lives inside those systems on those devices, and they're responsible for making sure that the backups are like when like if a custodian restores a backup, right? They should be going back to the data steward and saying, does everything look okay in the system? And the data steward who actually uses the data should look at it and say, yes, this is exactly what it should look like. Or they should say, you know what, this doesn't look right. And from the systems person's perspective, they hit restore and it said successfully restored, but maybe things aren't right. And that's the job of the data steward to pick out. Of course, there's also an information security role. In our industry, we talk a lot about CISO role or a virtual CISO role, but there's entire information security organizations, and there's an oversight role there. They're not responsible for all of security; they're responsible for overseeing security. And then the security engineers themselves, and sometimes these are the same people as the technologists in the IT group. Sometimes these are separate people whose only job is to, in this case, there's an example here. Well, they're on the red team and they do penetration testing, or they're on the blue team and all they do is incident response, right? And those are the security engineers. Um, Couple other roles I want to touch on. So these are outside your organization. Insurance underwriters, that role is really important in the overall risk equation. If you transfer some of your organizational risk to an insurer, the underwriter and the policies around that insurance binding, it really matters. So that's a really important role. I wrote risk auditors here, but it's really assessors and auditors. There are outside organizations, third party organizations that come in and they oversee or they inspect security. And then, of course, there's regulators, right? I was on the phone with a partner this morning, and their clients regularly meet with SEC examiners, and they're sometimes asking about cyber, right? So those are all examples of indirect security relationships. And whew, I feel like I've been standing in front of a classroom here. Shane, I am curious, as you work talking with partners about developing awareness programs. You find that they generally are aware of these responsibilities. They're taking the right level of ownership, right, over what they should be responsible for and what they should be asking their partners to be, or their customers to be responsible for.
Yeah, I think there's the ideal situation of having that broken down, right? But I think a lot of times what ends up happening, and I love that first slide that you had as far as the technologists and kind of the different kind of branches of the rest of the business itself. Um, they're the experts. They understand the landscape and understand what we should be doing. But it is very difficult to get there and be able to overarching, be able to cover both the company as well as end users and be able to make that happen. So I think the perspective is there. It's the aspect of getting there and being able to do that, and really having everybody bought on board too. I think that's the other part of it. It's always funny when I talk to an MSP and they're like, "Yeah, we don't want to run this for their CEOs or their management or their higher ups." It's like, well, those are the most important people to be able to do that too. So having that understanding and basically being able to kind of facilitate it in a streamlined capacity of basically being able to provide those pieces, but understand what the actual results and what the potential risk is there as well, is a very difficult thing to do. But I think a lot of what we're trying to accomplish, kind of in the security space, is helping that education piece, because it's a lot of that communication of being able to relay that and actually get everybody on the same page of what needs to get done.
Yeah, buy-in's hard, right? And yeah, I think when people buy into security overall, they respond well to these roles. There was a customer interaction I had. It was a few years ago now, but it just sticks in my head because they had this like really, um, it was like a palace of a security architecture, and
Yep.
what they did in it was the people that were the least important in the organization had the most security constraints and controls and training and stuff.
Yep.
And the people that were super critical,
Yep.
like if there's a problem with that person's user account or with that user or whatever on that person's desktop, like it would take down the company. They had like super user godlike powers, no security training, no constraints, no multi-factor. It was everything was inverted, right?
Exactly.
And
Exactly
uh,
like the pyramid that you had on the front page. Exactly right. The people at the bottom who understand it and have the most experience are the furthest away from the people who don't want to do it at all and have the most risk.
which is, it's true. I think if you don't have the buy-in at the top, right, there's that expectation that, oh, this is the responsibility of the people that work for me to figure out, right? But the reality is, legally, at least in most of the planet, anywhere built on English common law, which is all of the Commonwealth nations, definitely the United States, most places in the world, you cannot delegate the due diligence responsibility, the due care obligation. What that means is if you were supposed to be doing something, if other people in your position would reasonably normally handle something and you don't handle that thing, you're negligent. You're not doing the thing you're supposed to be doing.
Exactly.
And you really need buy-in. You need buy-in, and it's hard to overcome not having the buy-in. Now, if you have the buy-in, which is great, it's a great place to start. And then we start talking about, okay, the CEO wants stuff to happen with the board support for budgeting. We need people. We need all the people to do things. We need all the stakeholder roles to respond. And that's when we get into, okay, we got to tell the people what to do, right?
Yep.
People generally want to do the right thing, right?
Exactly. Especially if
They
somebody's telling them, hey, this is what the right thing is from the up top.
Yeah, yeah, and so then we get into how to do that, and I think that that's really like where you guys live, but not to get too far into Finn. When we talk about, and this is where we came up with three modes of to drive user action, right? Like we want to get people to do the things that they should be doing, that they would be doing if they knew they should be doing it, right? Because they want to do the right thing. And we use so the first mode
Yeah, and
was
education as numero uno, which is I think the biggest kind of starting point, right? Is everybody in the IT space that we're working with on a regular basis, we all know the ins and outs. Hey, don't click on everything, don't go in there. But when you're talking about the companies that are being supported, or even in internal IT companies, I think there's a lot of space for people coming in and not really understanding, hey, here's the extent of really what you should be looking out for, because it's not just don't click on this, or hey, watch out for these things, or don't open up something that you're not sure of. there's a lot more extensive on that, right? Passwords, a lot more outside passwords, working remotely, internet from other sources. There's these other things that people are interacting with both business wise and personally that they don't even realize that they're putting themselves at risk or the company at risk and things like that. So getting in front of them is extremely important. And then I think the other part is doing it where they're not feeling overwhelmed, right? I mean, I've gone through those trainings before where you're in for an hour, for you're in for the day, and it's like, hey, today's the cybersecurity training, and yeah, even if it's something that you're extremely interested in, it's okay, great. You get through the first hour, then you see people starting to fade, right? Where it's like, all right, this isn't really as effective for them. So how do we not only be able to get in front of them, do the education the right way, and get the topics that we need to cover, but doing it in a capacity where people are going to be able to absorb that and really get that information, and then really instill it within the rest of the company, right? Where you see somebody leaving a laptop open and you go, hey, you got to close that laptop. And then that really brings in that culture across the board. And getting it in front of them is definitely that first step to, you don't know what you don't know, right? And being able to address that is definitely the first part of kind of bringing that to the table.
Yeah, and I think I'm just going to say a lot of IT providers say things to me like, well, the users don't really want to do training, or well, they know that they're not supposed to do that thing. I tell them all the time, right?
Yep.
And the reality is, yeah, you might be telling them that thing. They know that you tell them that thing. They don't necessarily know that there's a reason why you tell them that thing. There's some other examples of that thing that are similar but not exactly the same. And then there's some counterintuitive things that I think, if you're an expert in cyber awareness content, right, you know that, hey, people need to know this thing. But as an IT provider, you might not realize that users need to be trained in a thing. And that there's an example that I trip over all the time, which is users should be trained to handle their own updates, like their own, like if they see that they're not up to, the browser's not up to date, if they see that their operating system's not up to date, they should be trained in what to do about that. And it's, I think a lot of IT providers that are trying to do the right thing say, oh, I don't need to train my users on that because I take care of that, right?
Yeah.
Which is great if you take care of that. And if you
Correct.
take care of that, if your user sees that something's out of date, something's gone wrong.
Yeah.
And when something's gone wrong, that's like a flag that your users can be your early detection system, and they could be alerting you before the world goes to hell.
Exactly.
And you need to train them to do that for you, to be your alert system. And that's something that you really have to, when it comes to education, this isn't simply like, next time you reset someone's password with them, telling them, oh, and make sure you choose a password that, right? There's really more that goes into it than a couple simple reminders. Oh, by the way, while you're in the middle of a help desk call, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a perfect example. Like just even upgrading your browser or whatever it may be in order to kind of have that, or at least being aware of those things. It's something that somebody probably wouldn't pay attention to at all unless you address it, right? Of, hey, it's not anything too crazy, but just check this out every so often. Or hey, if this is red, that's bad. Let us know about those things, right? So there's so many pieces of just the kind of standard, like we were talking about before, of hey, passwords, they want to be strong on this side.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also those other pieces of the puzzle where it might not be something that is kind of a day-to-day thing, but it is something to be aware of. And that, again, brings that culture across the board where now you're looking out for yourself, your own equipment, your own people, and then you can also help others be a little bit more efficient as well.
Yeah, and another example I see people trip over pretty frequently. It comes to training to people, training end users on how to recognize a data exposure or an incident. And I think that it's easy to go to users and just say, okay, we have this incident response plan. Let me know if there's an incident, and we're going to like swing into action, and hopefully there's a plan. But I think that users have a different idea of what an incident is than an IT admin, right? An IT admin may be understanding that the whole world is full of threat actors, and they get in and we can detect that, and we don't, we open the incident so it can be, investigated in depth and handled. Um, but the way a user thinks of an incident is really different. Like they think of like that newspaper they read last week where it said like some emails got hacked and it like changed an election.
Yeah.
Like, or they
Yep.
think like 600 million users like leaked in whatever. And so they're sort of thinking of the headlines, and they actually need some training because they don't actually understand how these breaches happen, right? They don't actually understand what an incident is. They need to be able to recognize it. And it's super important because if there's an insurance claim and there's a forensics around an incident and there's an arbitration, and during discovery they find out, oh, the user was alerted to patch, but they didn't patch, and they didn't patch for like 90 days. They ignored the warning or whatever because it just kept popping up, or they clicked the thing, they thought they did the thing, but the error message kept popping up, they just ignored it, right? Well, guess what? Negligence, right?
Yep.
And we didn't train them, and we should have trained them. And then they didn't, they didn't know that was they didn't know XYZ was an incident, or the IT department didn't declare the incident, or someone didn't declare the incident when it needed to happen as early as it needed to happen. Again,
Yep.
the arbitrator could look at the evidence and say, you know what, this could have been handled better, and if it was handled better, the insurer loss would have been lower, and so maybe the claim's not going to be approved in full, and that's a real thing that's happening right now that was not happening 5 years ago, which is the insurers have put a lot of pressure on, and they've been doing this forever to try to reduce their losses. But increasingly, when you're sitting in front of a judge or an arbitrator, people are saying, "Oh, people should know better these days,
Yeah.
right? Like you should have known better," is a real thing. Whereas previously, if you rewind 5 years ago, um, it was arguable that only experts knew, right?
Yep.
And the difference is in the millions of dollars of claims going one direction or another direction. And so like this, I'll get off my box on the education
No, you're
box,
spot
but
on.
like I it's a big deal for me.
Yeah, well, I think that's the point of the what people see is, hey, this, like you said, 600,000 emails have been breached, right, or whatever it may be. It's like, oh wow, that's a huge deal. Well, we only have 20 people at our company, so we don't have to worry about it, right? It's like all they're seeing is the big deal. And I know, I'm sure you've heard this before, and it's kind of said, you're not big enough to make the news, but you're still big enough to be breached, right? That whole dynamic of, okay, well, you see the big deal and you're thinking that you're the small deal, but the risk at the top level and the risk here are the same risk. It's just a matter of the education in between to make sure that you are actually understanding how to not be that company. And yeah, you won't make the news, but you'll have the same result of, hey, this could potentially sink the business, and actually getting to that point of, hey, yes, this is very scary. You should be aware of how that happened because you're still in that ilk. You're just not a news size company on that front. So it does make it a lot where, okay, well, they know the bad parts, they see the parts that are at risk, but they don't necessarily address them. Well, how do we educate on all of that to make sure that it's not happening to them as well?
Yeah. So there's probably 30 other examples I could surface
Sure.
of we train people because when they're in a situation, that this is the right way to react, right? And that's really important because thinking your way through, honestly, when stuff's going wrong, like nobody's super rational, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's scared when stuff's going wrong. Like they need to be trained in what steps to take, um, and so that's super important. But we've done all the education. Now what, right? Like it's how do we know it worked?
Got to make sure it's applicable, right? And I think that's the other part of it too, right? It is great for people to go, hey, yeah, I did my training, I understand this, but it doesn't really help to have them not actually tested on those things. So I think part of it is understanding and making sure that yes, we're bringing we're bringing a great experience in terms of overall, here's the information you need, but let's make sure that information's sinking in, right? I think kind of going back to the example I gave previously, where it's, hey, in the past, we would have 1 day session and everybody's getting a really good first hour. By the end of the day, nobody's really paying attention. And if there's no testing on the tail end of it, which most people don't want to have to take tests on a regular basis. So let's not take a test. Let's put it into a live action format, right? So all these things that are happening, and obviously on the phishing side of the house, we want to make sure that we're going to be testing those people to make sure that either they're gonna make a mistake and we're going to address it immediately on what they need to do, or they're not going to make a mistake and we can go, hey, great job. This is exactly why we did all that education to make you aware of these things now. One of the things that I think is always really critical in that capacity is you could educate people till you're blue in the face, but if they don't get it in a kind of a game time situation, they're not really going to see how that comes into play, right? So you might know, oh yeah, phishing comes in through emails and that's bad. Don't click on everything. But then you go, oh, this is something that I'm used to, and you click on it, right? It's like, well, that test is much more applicable than just knowing the details, because like you said, maybe you're in a rush, maybe you're not paying attention, maybe you go through something and you do make a mistake. Well, all right, that's okay for this time if we're testing it, but the next time won't be okay because it potentially could be somebody else. So it's important to not only educate, but make sure that those things are actually sinking in, and the value of that education is actually getting performed by some testing, and kind of bouncing back and forth, making sure that things are resonating, not just getting one ear and not the other type of deal.
Yeah, and simulation's a whole world, and I think that table stakes is a phishing simulation. It gives you a lot of data. It's super economical. It's easy to, as an organization, it's easy to look at that data and draw conclusions about, okay, I can see the organization needs more support over here. I can see the culture over at client B is like, something's got to happen. Like we got to do an in-service or something, or we gotta make sure that they get back into the education again. Like they clearly weren't paying attention.
Yep.
They said they were taking the training, but like they clearly didn't absorb it, right? So having that feedback loop super important. I just want to touch and say there's other types of simulation, but
100%.
they're all more sophisticated, and you really need the table stakes stuff to build on that. So of course there's penetration testing,
Yep.
which is a type of simulation. And I think that our universe has in our market segment, there's been a lot of focus on automating pen tests. But I'm going to tell you, as a security professional with a CISP in my name, um, I don't put a lot of. I think that there's a place for automation, and that's in like massive amounts of cheap data you can make quick decisions on. So, as an example, the phishing simulations are great, but for a pen test, if you're going to simulate that, you need to get the whole crew in there, the whole red team, right? And for most clients, that's not a reasonable thing to like land like 5 security, crackerjacks to try to break into their organization for the week.
Yeah.
And so, like, really, the thing you can do that's their size is the phishing simulation, and then you can take the results and you can bring it to a tabletop, and you could sit down with the users and say, okay, guys, this is what actually happened in the emails, right? What would your response be? And you could turn that into an incident response tabletop, right? Or you could say to them, well, it seems like I know you said that like this wasn't super interesting, the training stuff, but I can see from simulation that you clearly need more training.
Yep.
So here's the evidence that you need to actually go do that thing.
Yeah.
Um, that's super applicable there. So that was our second awareness mode, right? Is
Yeah.
the actually testing whether the training or the education was working,
Yeah,
right?
I think there's a lot of things that you can do outside of phishing too. Like you said, like there's even things where, hey, take a QR code, throw it into the office if there's a company that has an office, and
Oh
see
yeah,
if
that's a
anyone
fun one.
scans it. And it's like, yeah, hey, that's it.
Free
That's
iPad.
exactly, yeah, something like that. Or send out not an email, but send out like an actual hard copy, straight up, straight up
Yeah.
PDF that has something on it that goes like you said, hey, here's this offer. Or even just do it where it's like, all right, at lunchtime, walk around the office and see who's actually locking their computers, right? That's a real easy one that you could do. So there's other stuff outside of that too, but I think a lot of it is, here's the education that we just put you through. Everybody's who's up to date on their web browser, if we're the ones that are doing it individually. There's plenty of pieces of it, but like you said, phishing is pretty much the number one reason that there's a risk. So it's a great place to start and kind of give you that baseline.
I'm curious. So you guys have been in the simulation game here for 2, 3 years.
About
Do I
three
have
years.
that right?
Yep.
3 years. Um, but this product's this offering has been around a little bit longer. I think it really blew up in 2015, 2016, and just exploded from there. But despite the fact that it's been around a long time, um, I think that there's a missed opportunity for most providers to really create revenue around this. I think packaging the education and the testing, the simulation, and we're going to talk about the continuous operationalizing, in a moment. But I just want to talk about revenue for a moment. Like packaging those things up, um, it could create a lot of revenue, particularly if rather than just throwing it into the stack, you tell the customer, look, this is this valuable. It
Yep.
includes all of these things, like the 4-point touch or the 3-point touch of how we're gonna secure your organization, right? And you turn that into a value bundle. Do you see people increasingly learning to monetize this? Because I've seen, if we rewind like 5 years, uh, I think that there was this understanding that this was something you could sell, but I'm not sure how effective people were at monetizing it, really.
Yeah, it is kind of a wide scope in the sense of some people do it very well. Some people just kind of set it up and hopefully it lands right. And I think that kind of goes back to our original point of the fact that just doing something and checking the box doesn't necessarily mean that you're more cyber secure, right? Yes, sure, you're on that form. Now you could check off for cyber insurance that you're doing training, but if you're not seeing what those reporting and what the actual results are off of that, and then being able to potentially do something with that too, right? So if somebody is failing a bunch of fish and being able to understand what that is, and I think getting the understanding for what they're struggling with specifically and reviewing those pieces gives you a lot of ability for that. And I think that's even how we've developed in the last couple of years of adding, for example, our report phishing button, where now it's, hey, we took that initial test of did you click, did you not click, to now did you actually recognize that this is something that is going to be potentially malicious, and then from there now you actually have that. I mean, we just built out the integration with ConnectWise that will actually create a service desk ticket for you to be able to go back, review it, see what it looks like, put time against it, bill against it, maybe put them in a better, more in-depth training platform, or not platform, but experience. So now they're maybe getting a little bit more, but at the same time, they're needing that little bit more
Well,
because of all the stuff you previously did.
so that really leads into our third awareness mode, which is I mean, if we just think of this as like operational maturity levels, right? You've got like the basics of education, the basics of testing against that education. But if you want to move beyond basics and really get a lot of value out of this, right, you're going to operationalize. It's going to be a continuous process. It's going to be ongoing. You're going to have data and measurements. And I didn't know about that feature. That is honestly, it's awesome that we have. Okay, here's a detection. The system has an insight. It's actionable. The action's created. The service provider can then work that action, and oh, guess what? Revenue. You know, is that's really neat.
Yeah, it's the cycle that you need to have, right? You provide better and overall experience and more cybersecurity. You can then be able to make the revenue off of that, and they get the result of being more cybersecure for it. So everybody wins in that case, and that's kind of like you said, kind of relating right into the continued support side of it. Of well, how do we identify those pieces, and how do we make sure that we are understanding what that business or what that user is specifically doing, and from there, reporting is a big portion of it, right? I think it's always hilarious to me when I talk to somebody and they're like, yeah, we're not doing any reporting. It's like, well, how do you know what's happening? It's like, well, we don't need to do the reporting. We just need to make sure that it's being sent out. It's like, well, if we're not doing that, again, it goes back to just checking a box. And cybersecurity is not checking a box. It's doing the things the right way to make sure that there's little to no risk. And I think that's a big portion of it too. So having the ability to understand who's clicking on what, or at least in our case, who's clicking on what, who's doing the training, who's not doing the training, who might be struggling with those things, gives you the understanding of, okay, now these people need a little bit more experience in these different areas, right? So that way you could really come in, apply them to those areas. And now we kind of start the cycle back over, right? Back to the education, bring them back through testing. And now we have the results towards the tail end of what we need. I think as far as the user piece, that's a huge aspect of it, but also the understanding who the vendor is that you're working with and making sure that they're kind of helping you to get to that. Hey, here are the things that you should be looking out for as well. So basically, hey, we saw that you had X, Y, and Z experiences. Did those things help? How did you go about the next step of it? And where else can we help to be able to bring more value to that experience? Because it's a non-stopping cycle. And I think anybody in IT is well aware that we're always kind of chasing our tails in the sense of something changes. It's like, all right, cool. We adjust for that change. We educate, we test, we do it again. Something else changes, kind of all goes back around. So being able to understand the actual, the actual results from the two pieces prior, as well as being able to revamp it and make sure that you're continuously getting the best of whatever the value is there, is a huge aspect of it too. Because IT is not staying still, that's for sure, or cybersecurity even more so.
Well, you mentioned a minute ago a mentality that I see a lot, which is this old simulation mentality, like the last 8 years or so,
Yep.
where okay, check the box, literally check the box on the insurance form. I'm doing cyber awareness training. Check.
Yep.
But these days, and I just talked about this, like it's really like, yes, you're going to get the policy. Great. You've got the policy. Then there's a loss. Then what happens, right?
Yep.
Then there's a loss investigation before the payout. And, really, if that was the mentality you brought into things, right? Your insurer is going to have trouble with that. They're going to say, look, the reasonable due diligence standard is not that you paid for awareness training. It's that your users actually did it, and you went through a reasonable effort to make sure that they took the training. And if they didn't take the training, you reported that to someone who could do something about it, or you took that action yourself. And if you don't do those things, guess what? If you didn't sell that cyber awareness training to your end client, that would be their fault. If
Yep.
you did sell that cyber awareness training, but you didn't actually manage the program for them, guess what? That's now your fault, right? And honestly, that arbitrator, they're going to say, "Oh, you're right. That's a reasonable expectation. That enterprise, that client thought they were buying cyber awareness training, and they thought that it came with the normal cyber awareness training metrics, reporting, whatever responsibility as part of that, because you're a fully managed MSP and you do fully manage things." Um, you're right. That liability is not the insurer. It's not the end client. It's actually you as the IT MSP. And no managed service agreement is going to protect you from negligence. You actually can't write a contractual agreement to protect yourself from negligence. So, yeah, I mean, it's really important that our whole industry buys into, yeah, we need to report on this. We need to operationalize it. And if it's as simple as, oh, a ticket got opened, great.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
that's
and I
neat.
think the dynamic that you just mentioned too is fairly interesting. In like the check in the box aspect is always crazy to me, because it's like, oh well, this checks the box, so now we're available for insurance, right? And it's like, so you want to use that insurance? It's like, no, insurance is there as a, this is the worst case scenario, right? It's, hey, you don't buy a home and then say, hey, I have a lock on the front door, but like that gets me insurance, but I'll just use insurance when somebody breaks it and steals all my stuff, right? That's kind of the same dynamic of, yeah, the insurance is there as a very, very last resort, rather than it being something where it's like, if it goes wrong, we check the box so we qualify for it. That's not what you want. Nobody wants to go through that process. So a big portion of that is making sure that you have the education and the pieces of the puzzle in that place to, in this case, lock that front door, so that way you don't have to worry about the insurance at all.
Yeah, and the insurers, they're frankly not putting up with it anymore.
Yeah.
Like they're like, no, you don't get to treat us that way. Like you still have to do your part.
Yeah, you still have to put the effort in. We're not just throwing out cash.
I want to talk about Finn, but before I get into Finn, I want to talk about like we've got these awareness modes that I mean, you guys are basically in position of this conversion moment in providers' practices and MSPs' practices, where maybe they were not doing it all before, maybe they were doing things an old way, and they're looking to really up their game because it's 2024, soon to be 2025, right? What's that trajectory look like? You onboard them, and then what? It's just like awesome from day one. Like what's the process like?
Yeah, and that it is supposed to be that way. Of course, there's always the ability to kind of add additional pieces in there, but I think that that's the biggest part of this too, is that because this is, there's so many other elements of a stack, right, of a security stack, that this is one where it should be easy to set up, it should be easy to run, it should be getting all the information out and back that you need. But it shouldn't take that much time to do so. And I think that's where sometimes it, especially SAT, kind of gets lost in the mix a little bit sometimes. Of, hey, we're doing all these great things to make sure that the actual machinery is good to go, but how do we make sure that those users are good to go too? So constantly evolving on the sense of making sure that we're keeping each piece of the platform accessible, digestible,
But
understandable.
you've got resources to support that story arc, right? Of like people were, maybe doing things an old way, and then like this stuff. Yes, it's you can make the software work smooth, right? But there's still a conversion. They still need to change what they're doing. They still need to actually enroll people, right? Um, they need to check in and make sure it's working the way they expect. You mentioned SAT, the security awareness testing, and there's actually some setup steps there because if you want to be super convincing for these phishing emails, right, you want them to look. You need to work hard at delivering them with a high level of reputation, the same way that attackers are, right? Let me tell you, attackers get through my filters all the time. I'm sure not all of them get through, but some of them get through on a pretty regular basis, and it does not look like spam, right? Unless you're trained to understand, like, oh, I'm not expecting an invoice from you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that question makes more sense now that you broke it down that way. So I think that is kind of the evolution that we've seen, right? And like you said, 5 years ago, it was so much different in terms of the way that it was approached, that it was like, hey, there's a guy that's sending out emails that we'll see if somebody clicks on them. And education was very much like a, hey, here's your hour, here's the day that we're going to do it, and those things. So I think people are starting to realize that these things can be done in a more fine-tuned fashion for the users, but also for the MSPs in the sense of the way that it runs. And the way to approach it is to bring it where it is. It's tough to say the training is fun, but if we can make it to the point where people are understanding and actually getting some of those values out of it without having to overcomplicate things, I think that is where we're starting to see it. Do the tests to make them as tests and try to disguise them as much as possible. Do the education to the point where the user is actually getting the value out of it in a very short fashion rather than trying to overextend or overexert that side of it. And again, making sure both are obviously very top shelf and very relevant to the things that are happening, which is another part of it too. That's a whole nother aspect. And kind of what we highlighted before too, things are changing on an ever changing basis, right? So because of that, we need to make sure that new templates are in there. There's new trainings. If there's a new topic that comes up that somebody's getting risky at, okay, great. Like even for COVID, for example, when that happened, well, that was a great opportunity for a lot of malicious people to go, hey, I'm going to make all of my phishing and all my attack points based around COVID because people are nervous. They want to get into that. So like things like that, and making sure we're always staying as close to the forefront as possible because it is a constantly evolving landscape. So we got to be flexible on that front too.
Well, I wanna put Finn front and center here. So you guys have a specific offering. Um, Talk to us about how you work with partners. What's different about Finn? What's great about Finn specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say after of the three things that we just talked about is really a lot of what we have focused on when it comes to our solution and how we go about it. Now, we've seen a lot of other platforms out there, and there's a lot of different options. But I think, especially for us in the MSP space, that's really what we really converged on to make as effective as possible. And again, there's two sides of that house, right? There's the MSP that's setting it up and running it, or the IT team that's setting up and running it, and the end users and what they're going to be able to get out of it. So when we're looking at the three topics that we just talked about, when it comes to education, testing, and then the support from there, we want to be able to bring all of that to the table, but doing it as simply and as effectively as possible, right? So on the onboarding and the actual setup side of the house, we make it for the MSP that we're going to guide them through that process on what we know is going to be relevant. We're going to basically make sure that within about a 10-minute span of onboarding, you're actually going to have all the automation that's going to come out of the platform from that perspective. So you're not going to have to worry about coming in here and making sure that all of the content that we had just discussed of being extremely important is going to be relevant, because we're going to make sure that that's always going to be very relevant based off of the way that we basically have everything set up. So from that automation side of the house, we make it very easy for an MSP to feel comfortable knowing that they are going to get the proper education through our training side of the platform. We're going to get proper testing through our phishing side of the platform. And then we're going to do all of the pieces that we need to when it comes to the support end, when it comes to reporting, when it comes to follow-up. We actually, as Finn, do quarterly business reviews with our partners if they would like to basically go in and do exactly what we were talking about before, right? Hey, we see that your reports, you have 5 people that are users to watch. How do you feel about them? Should we be bringing them into more training? Here's a couple, maybe a suggested training that we would say would be useful for them. So because of that entire kind of metric, we're covering a lot of what the MSP or the IT team needs when it comes to setup, but also the support on the tail end of it. When we're talking about the end user side, kind of the same thing. We're going to provide extremely relevant education. When it comes to that, we're providing multiple different vendors. So it's always going to be something fresh, something new, but it's not going to be too overwhelming either, right? Nobody wants to sit down and go through an entire hour-long training, but if we can keep them pretty digestible and pretty small terms of the time commitment, but very informative and very digestible in terms of what we're actually delivering on, that education sinks in a lot easier, and it's going to be tested on to make sure that they actually understand what those pieces are.
So,
When it comes to yeah, go ahead.
well, I just want to chip in here
Yeah.
because the audience probably doesn't know that we're actually. I mean, we have a marketing partnership, but I'm actually a Phin customer, and I had a lot of fun signing up for your product because the onboarding experience was awesome. It was just like slipstream smooth, which is not the normal. Like I'm exposed to a lot of these products, so it's not the normal experience as a IT provider, right?
Yeah, especially in the IT space where it is such important information and important actions that we're making. It's usually not that easy to get it rolling. But because of the way that we have it structured, try to make it as simple, but as again simple and effective is I say it way too often, but that's exactly it. Make it simple for the setup, make it effective for what we're getting out of it.
Yeah. So people on board, they get in there, they get the training they need. You guys are there to help them, and you guys are really focused on the channel, right? Like, are you guys channel only?
So we're MSP, we're channel focused, 100%.
Yeah.
So everything that we're doing. Actually, when I start my demonstrations, usually I go, we are MSP focused, and that's pretty much everything that I just mentioned. Of everything
Yeah.
that we're
Yeah.
doing is for the MSP and their end users to make sure that they're getting the greatest experience on both sides. But I always say we're MSP driven as well, because what we do now, as far as how we're moving forward, is those QBRs, or what we call Fin meetings as well. Those basically are put in place to understand what we're doing now, what we can be doing moving forward, and how do we stay on that forefront of being able to provide a lot of those pieces. So even like the report phishing button that I was mentioning earlier, that is a feature that we actually just added in because our partner base went, hey, we would love this report phishing button. How do we get that in place? We heard enough of that we dedicated time to be able to invest into additional functionality to help extend that. So as we're continuing to grow, the beautiful thing is we've grown with the channel. We're continuing to focus on the channel, and we're continuing to grow with the drive of the channel from our partners. But we also have an MSP advisory council that we talk to on a regular basis. We even take feedback from prospects on a fairly regular basis of, hey, here are the things that we would love to see in the future. And a lot of times that is a great kind of continued conversation of, great, we got this piece in. Here's some other stuff that we've added in, and been able to continue to service the channel as well as possible, and continuing that route with some other stuff that's coming down the pipeline for 2025 as well.
Well, I want to take a moment for takeaways here. I learned something new today, which is always fun as a security geek, which is that in addition to what as an industry we've been doing with simulation for a long time of uh, researching the data, understanding how to draw actionable insights, which are usually like this entire client or this department or like this quarter of the year, or they're usually pretty general, right? That actually there's some really specific insights and actions. In particular, the ability to trigger an intervention request into the help desk. That's super neat. And so, like, neat takeaway for me. I'm looking forward to toying around with that.
Yeah,
Um,
check out the report a fish button because it actually can submit to Microsoft Defender now too, which is again just another piece. We've basically released the report a fish 3 times, and each time it just gets better and better. But again, all because of the channel and the people that we speak to, and really give us the insight on how to be better for it, which is always fun to see because I'm the same way, Matt. Where it's, oh, cool, I didn't even think about that. This could lead into that portion of it, and the extent that we can really continue to just make the overall experience a lot better and a lot more effective.
Neat. All right. Anything you want to leave us with before we go into what's next?
I think I'm all set, but thank you very much as always for having me on. It is great chatting with you, and yeah, always a pleasure chatting with everybody, and hopefully everybody else enjoyed as well.
All right. Well, next week's Turkey Day Friday, so we're doing a rebroadcast. But we had this super popular uh, live stream a few months back about Azure AD and Intune, and so we're going to rerun that. But the following week, we're also bringing in. We got a new guest here. If this slide wants to load, which it doesn't want to load, but um, we're talking about. Cyber warranties with Cork. So Cork's going to be back here 2 weeks from today. We're going to have a couple of people from that shop, and that'll be fun to talk about the updates since the last time we had them on. And with that, all of you should enjoy a wonderful week and enjoy whatever days you're taking off next week.
Yes, enjoy. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
All right, bye.